Hi, it's Christina with the Sisyphean Journal, and we're here for another review of the Triggernometry interview with Dr. Calum Miller about why he came to believe that abortion is a wrong thing to do, not just to the babies, but to the mothers.
No, that's absolutely fine. So, Callum, what is your position when it comes to abortion? Do you think under absolutely no circumstances should it be allowed? Should it only be allowed for, women within a certain time frame, etc.?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think what I'd say is that if we really value human equality, we have to value and protect human life regardless of how it came about and regardless of its inconvenience to other people. And sometimes that, has serious implications. It does mean that we have to protect human life, even when doing so can be very costly. One of the ways we've seen that is through the COVID pandemic. So many people have been through so much sacrifice in order to protect vulnerable human life. And while, of course, we all disagree about which restrictions and which, rules should be in place and which of them are too much, I think all of us would agree that we do have some duty to go to considerable lengths to protect vulnerable human lives. I think all of us would want to say at least that basic principle. So I would say that regardless of how a human being came about, regardless of whether it has a disability, regardless of how old it is, regardless of how developed it is, if we really think humans are equal, we have to treat them all as equal and give them all the same legal protection. The exception to this, I think, is if a woman's life is at risk. And, we as adult human beings sometimes think it's okay to take human life even when that human is an adult. We sometimes think it's okay to kill adults, but only in very exceptional circumstances, if the adult is posing an immediate risk to someone's life, for example.
Or walking too slowly.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. Naturally, I thought that went without saying. So what I'm saying is, in the case of a woman's life being at risk, you're wanting to uphold life and you're wanting to save as much life as possible. In most of these cases, the overwhelming majority, actually, there's no way that you can save the baby either way. Because if the woman dies, then the baby will die because the woman is supporting the baby. So it's very rare that there's a case where you have to choose between the woman and the child. But I would say in those cases, what you want to do is save the maximum amount of life, and therefore you can deliver the baby early in order to save the woman's life.
Can we come back to this point? Because you haven't convinced me that,
Sure.
that a fertilized egg is a human being
Sure.
in the sense that it has the same moral value as a baby or an adult human or a born human. Because as I said, it's not just that you talk about cognitive ability. I don't think being human comprises solely of that. I think being human is a combination of a few different things, and it's, are you mostly fully formed? Human beings have a recognizable shape, right? Now, I'm not saying that someone who has no legs isn't a human being, but generally speaking, we kind of get what a human looks like, right? If a bunch of aliens that look like fertilized eggs descended from the sky, we would be like, those are aliens, they're
Right.
different to us. Do you know what I mean? So I do think that and again, I'm only putting this out there as a devil's advocate argument. It's not an issue I've thought about much, so I'm really keen to hear your thoughts. But like that fertilized egg, it is the potential for human life, and if given the right environment, it will develop into one. But to suggest that doing something to that is exactly the same as killing me or you, I'm not convinced by that argument.
Sure.
Convince me more.
So I think one of the things, there's a couple of things that we could say here. The first is that we have a sort of sense that you have to be conscious, or that consciousness is really important to being morally considerable. I mean, if you thought of it this way, imagine that a two-celled embryo was completely conscious. They were like a little Socrates. They were completely incredibly intelligent, could feel pain, could do all these sorts of things. I think the form wouldn't matter so much to us. I think we'd think, this is really weird, but this is something we have to treat as a morally valuable entity.
I think that's true.
And so I think we can talk about form, but ultimately, if something has almost no human form but thinks in a similar sort of way to us, we'd think that is something we should protect. And
but you're not suggesting that a fertilized egg is
No,
conscious.
I'm not saying it is, but just for the sake of imagination. And likewise, I have had patients in hospitals that are not really recognizable in the sense of, the human form. And, you know, in older times where people went to different countries and saw that people had different color skin, people in older times thought that is so different to what the human form looks like, they cannot be our species. And so I think we are vulnerable to kind of a sort of bias about the shape that human beings are, when really we know that that's not really what contributes to them having basic rights or the same value as the rest of us.
But come on, you talk about polling. How many people do you think, if you poll the public, would say a two-celled organism is a human?
Not many.
Not many,
yeah,
right?
Exactly, yeah.
So that's what I'm getting at.
And, yeah, no, absolutely. And I'd be completely open that the kind of complete pro-life view, I'm in a small minority on. Another thing I'd say on that, though, is that this sort of conscious bias, I think, makes things a bit tricky, because we think harming people is about harming someone who is conscious. If someone's completely unconscious, how can you harm them? How can you deprive them of rights and things? But then I think there are instances where you can harm people and they never experience any sort of harm. So, for example, say I'm not married, but imagine I were. Suppose I go out and cheat on my wife, and she never finds out, and no one ever feels any sort of harm from it. They never feel any physical pain, they never feel any emotional pain, they never have any sort of negative feeling from it.
I can tell he's not married, mate. Because that is not a viable situation.
Of course.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, in Venezuela, that'd make you a real man.
But I've clearly harmed someone, even if they never found out, even if no one ever feels anything kind of negative from it. I've nevertheless done something that is seriously wrong. And so that's how I try and think about the early embryo who, at a very early stage, is not sentient, is not conscious. I think, can it still be wrong even though they don't feel anything bad? And my thoughts about those other situations make me think, actually, maybe it is possible that you can seriously harm something or someone even though they never experience the negative effect of that harm. And so I appreciate that from...
I don't know if he's going to bring this up, but part of that to me is, you think about one of the reasons that we see it as so much more tragic when a child dies than when an adult dies, is all of the experiences that child never gets to have. You know, you look at you know, there's a drunk driver plows into a minivan, and you know, the 2-year-old dies, and you think that 2-year-old never gets to play Little League, that 2-year-old never gets to have first day of school, go to the prom, graduate, get married, have kids. You look at all these life experiences that you've deprived that 2-year-old of by driving drunk and plowing into the minivan that child is in. And when you're doing an abortion, you're depriving them of even more experiences. The experience of hearing their mother's voice, the experience of the taste of the amniotic fluid changes as the mother eats different things. So you're depriving them of that experience, the experience of moving, the experience of feeling their muscles, the experience of opening and closing their eyes, of seeing that filtered red light that comes through the uterine wall. You know, you're depriving them of every single human experience. And so to say, well, you know, they're not conscious yet, so you're going to deprive them even of that. You know, that's one more thing that you're taking away from them, is how I see it. And that's how a lot of other pro-lifers see it. That when people go, but it's so young, it hasn't experienced anything yet, it's like, that's like saying it's okay to throw a 6-month-old baby off a bridge because that 6-month-old baby has never experienced, you know, the excitement of hitting a home run in Little League. You know, the fact that this kid hasn't had the experiences yet is another reason why it was horrible to kill that kid.
From a sort of intuitive perspective, it's completely counterintuitive, and I get that, and I'm not saying that you're crazy for having that reaction. But the first thing I would say is, we know that we can harm people even if they never feel any negative consequences from it. And secondly, when we...
Here's another example I'd give, because he's phrasing it, you can harm people without them feeling any negative consequences of it. So let's say that Grandpa dies, and Grandma just goes through the closet and donates everything to Goodwill. And somebody at Goodwill is going through the pockets, and Grandpa had $10,000 in this old jacket pocket. Grandma doesn't know that $10,000 was there, and that Goodwill worker can just slip that $10,000 into his pocket and leave, and Grandma's never going to know. But I think morally we can recognize that was taking that money from Grandma. She never would have put that suit coat in the Goodwill pile if she had known that there was $10,000 in the pocket. And, the fact that she was grieving and bereaved and just, trying to get this sad task over with so she didn't go through the pockets, you still feel like that person at Goodwill who, oh yeah, $10,000, I'll take this, that they really shafted Grandma. Or, imagine a situation where somebody, they inherited a ring from Grandma, and they say, is this ring worth anything? They go to a jeweler and ask, what do you think this ring is worth? They go, it's worth about $50. And Grandma says, okay, yeah, you say, okay, give me $50 for Grandma's ring. And you never find out that they knew that, that ring had belonged to Marie Antoinette and would fetch $500,000 at a Sotheby's auction. And, she never finds out. You get that $500,000. The granddaughter never finds out that ring was worth way more than $50. You have still harmed her, even though she doesn't know about the harm. You know about the harm.
Do think really carefully about what is it that gives people value. The only way we can say that they have the same value is by something that they all share in common. Now, we all have the human form to different degrees. Some people have it to a sort of 90, they look 90% human. I say I'm in that category because I'm a little bit fat and I don't look like the perfect human form. Some people have maybe 50% of the human form because they've had amputations or they have a disfigurement to their face and so on. The only thing we all have to the same degree is being a human. And so what I'm saying is that if we really think carefully about human equality and what it's based on, it has to be something that we all have to the same degree. And the only thing that fits those criteria is being a human being in the biological sense. And so what I'd say is, I get that it's counterintuitive, and I'm sure many people listening will say, I agree with Konstantin, this is completely crazy to think that this is a person. But what I'd say is that morality often is counterintuitive. Often when we think through it very carefully, we come to conclusions that seem counterintuitive. But when we do that hard work of thinking through them in real detail, sometimes that counterintuitive thing is the only conclusion we're left with. And that was the case for me on this issue.
Hey, Francis.
Okay, so they're going to go into an ad. So that's that section.